Andrea Clement, he's one of the minds behind the new initiative in Spain, which is a bit different to this one. It's because it's bringing science to Parliament, not meeting the Parliament. And basically, I want to thank you especially because it's 6:30 in the morning there. So I think that you woke up bright and early. And thank you so much. I'll just leave the floor to you, and please tell us all about that initiative.
So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk here, also to explain our experience, which is, I have to say, in much sense, learn from the Australia experience. So for those of you, can you see my screen? Yeah. Yes, I think so. So basically, I came from as a Science in Parliament, which is an institution that we born in 2018 to try to help politicians to put science in their agendas, to use it in their day by day. And just to introduce a little bit myself, I am a researcher, I am a biomedical engineer, and I work inside with the heart. But I had at some time the opportunity to think about and interact on how politicians were using science in the day by day, how the politicians decided how to go into a specific topic and move it on. And at some point, I had the opportunity to talk in the Parliament and to set up a meeting in which more than 100 MPs, parliamentaries, sat together with more than 200 scientists to discuss about how in their different topics of work they could help each other. And this, as we have seen from Sabine, is something that you are doing in Australia for more than 20 years. But in Spain, 2018 was the first time that it happened. And it's not easy to put together people from those two worlds. And it's not easy, as Sabine mentioned, to ensure that that moves into something useful. And not only because politicians are completely full of work, but because there are many aspects that make it difficult to move it on. But at the same time, if we try to understand in the society in which we live, and that's what we have been moving on, there are at least 12 important topics that have been from the last years identified as all challenges that our society will deal with in the next decades, years, months, who knows? This is a slide from before the pandemic. And all these challenges are challenges that have many aspects, but only one thing in common, that this is science will be needed if we want to go against them and we want to survive to them. So we need to be sure that the people who makes and takes decision is sufficiently informed to take the right decision in the right moment. And this is something that is being more and more complex every year. If we think about the global changes, the great intereconomy interdependency, the fact in which many times the democracies or the people think that their way in which they are taking the decision is not necessarily legitimized by the systems. So we need to ensure that at some point the public doesn't lose the sense of control and trust the process of decision. And it's not because science is who can help, who has to take the decisions, but needs to be there to help them in the process to take the decisions in most of those aspects. At the end, from science, we have the responsibility to inform, to give options to those that are taking the decisions. But understanding at the same time, the science is not who has the chance to take the final decision. Science is a knowledge that has the responsibility to provide this interaction from the social point of view, from the economical point of view, from the technological point of view, from the healthy point of view. All the scientists that are working in the different areas need to have the opportunity to interact and to present this knowledge to the people that takes decisions, but at the same time needs to be aware that it needs to grab up and we pay the politicians to have that decisions, to make that decisions. And that is something that we have been trying to move it on. But the truth is that if we try to analyze the relations between science and politics, it's not as easy as we may imagine for many reasons. One is the fact that, as most of the scientists that are here today know, we are busy people. We have a lot of grants to write, a lot of papers to write or review, a lot of experiments to do, and not really too much incentives to spend our time talking with politics that are ready or thinking about how to make their work better. And at the same time, politicians is probably another sector that's fully of work and do not follow the same times that science. They want answers many times right now, which science usually cannot provide. So at the end, it's difficult to make these two work together. And also, if we do it, many times, at least in Spain, but I think this is something that happens around the world, when science become closer to politicians, instead of talking about science, about how the science can help the politics, we usually complain about we do not have sufficient funds, which is true, at least in Spain, but the fact is that is not necessarily what politicians need. So we need to separate what means politics for science, how to spend the money, and what means science for policy, how to be sure that the science is useful for the politicians. This is something that usually is mixed and it's highly different. And another important thing in this relation between scientists and politicians is the fact that we live in silos of knowledge, but also of interaction. It's really difficult that scientists take attention to how our research is making a difference in health or in society or in economy when we are developing a novel technology, for example. We do not necessarily have the skills to understand globally what's happening with what we are doing in the lab. And that means that it's difficult also and challenging for us to discuss with scientists of other areas and try to put that or research topic into a level that it can be interesting or important for politicians. We need to try to move that and to remove this kind of control and command systems in which only a few scientists talk each other, and we try to ensure that all scientists have the possibility to interact and to introduce their research and their knowledge into the conversation. But this is at the same time, those challenges are open to certainly opportunities. And right now, and we are here, I'm really far away from Australia, and I'm talking to you, and it's a great pleasure, thanks to technology. We use it in health, we use it in quality of life, we use it for working. And at the end, it's true that it's something that if we think into the politicians, they use it, but it's not something that is in the day by day. Or many times we are continuing doing politics that we were doing 100 years ago. So what we focus is how the science could help inside the parliament, how it could help in the way in which the parliament works. And we focus in the legislative power, in the parliament, instead of the executive, the government, because at the end, if you think about I like to write it in here, the process in which the politics works, the parliament makes the hypothesis, the way in which it happens. The executive is the government that ensures that the day by day works, but they do not have probably the times to think in 4, 5, 10 years from now, and later to have the public evaluation of lions or the evidence of that public evaluation. But here, the parliament is a place in which we have the different groups. There is sufficiently different ideologies to introduce, in addition of the sources of knowledge that they already have, the science as something that can be useful for them. So here we focus in how it could be done. And what we learn is that it's not something new. As you may know, there are many parliaments around the world in which they have, in addition to this kind of meetings with scientists, they have offices for science advice. And what these kind of offices make is to provide the reports in usually forecast new topics that could be useful to the MPs, to the parliamentarians, to be ready and to know about it. For example, regarding the new topic of technologies, new medical devices, or new drugs, or new ways in which the society is responding to certain novel technologies. These kind of reports try to be short, try to be of less than 3-4 pages, and need to be developed by hundreds of researchers, experts in that field, that summarize in a way in which it will be useful for the politics, that topic, and make it available to all the politicians, despite their party, despite their ideology, to be sure that in the moment in which they start to discussing, they have that information coming from that. This is what we try to move it on in Spain. And the truth in Spain, there have been at least 6 times that these kinds of parliamentary offices has been trying to set it up, from 80s to at least in 2017. But the truth is that never succeed, and because it's difficult to understand and to make this happening. So what we were analyzing is that in 2017, when we started, is that if we want to put together the political and the innovation system, we need to be sure that the civil society is also there, trying to push them and put the whole triangle together. And that's what we started. We started and thanks to the technology, thanks to Twitter, we and inspired in a talk from Angel Lopez, which is here today organizing this meeting, explaining the process of Science Meets Parliament in Australia. We move it, and why not doing this in Spain? Why not trying to start this kind of collaboration between scientists and politics by means of Science Meets Parliament? And we move it on through internet, and it's true that in less than 1 month, we have more than 100 institutions, universities, public institutions, private research institutions, pushing to make this a reality. And we had the opportunity to go to the parliament, talk with the MPs, talk with the board of the parliament, and set up the first Science in Parliament on 2018. This was a great opportunity to discuss with them, to learn about how they work, and also to learn how the scientists could be useful in there. In this meeting, we have two kind of events. One were huge rooms events in which we prepare topics, in which we sit together as scientists, experts in that topics, and politics interested in that topic, and they discuss together in a public manner. They are on YouTube, really interesting meetings. But we also did the same in a small room, without cell phones, without cameras, politics from different parties in the same table, discussing with scientists about how the new medical devices were going, how, for example, how the mathematics should be taught, why the antibiotics are failing. These kind of small topics in which they not necessarily were aware, but it's highly interesting from them, and it's not something that is matter if you are from this party or from the other party. This was a really successful event, and the truth is that for the first time we have 200 researchers inside the parliament, which was also nice to be there. But at the same time, the parliament unanimity with all the parties together, you decided to set up the Spanish parliamentary offices for science. And this is was great, but the truth is that we have elections there, 2 elections in 2019, and in 2020, we had the pandemic. So this had to be delayed, but now is a reality. Now we already set up the new science parliamentary offices of for science advice in Spain. Now it is already 7 people working in there. They are starting to prepare the topics that will be discussed in 2022 in the parliament, and how science can help in that. And it is something that we are really excited, but it's at the end is a movement from the science that arrived into the parliament and now has an office there to help parliamentary and to help them in all the process of taking decisions. But at the end, this is just the beginning. Ensuring that we have a good relations between this, a place to talk with politicians doesn't mean that it necessarily have a conversation. So we need to be sure that to help in the process of decision makers, we need to be there. We need to actively push scientists to move from their labs, to spend some of their time not only thinking into the next paper or the next patent, but also in how their science can be useful in the parliament. And that means that we need to, now that we have, at least in Spain, set up the process to have a receptor for the message, we need to be sure that the emitter, the researcher, prepares their knowledge in a way in which is useful for the politicians. Because at the end, we cannot expect that the politicians read our papers, or we cannot expect that the politicians understand or the details of what we are doing. We have to ensure that the messages are prepared in a way in which it is useful for the politicians. And this is difficult. And this is not necessarily, we are not trained in that. And that's what we are trying to move, trying to understand and how to make scientists to, like, the first thing that they do not have, never to recommend. Science usually doesn't have the knowledge to have the answer to the big questions, but usually has the process to define which is the knowledge and which are the uncertainties that we have at this point, and try to provide several options in order to allow the politicians that usually have to deal with on knowledge to take the optimal solutions from that. And this is what we are doing now. We are moving into the process of knowledge mobilization, trying to train scientists to go to the parliament and to discuss with politicians and to prepare their knowledge and be aware when they are making their knowledge, to sure that it will be transferred also to the society and help our politicians to make their tasks the better as possible. This is something that, again, we are learning from Australia. We are in high collaborations with some of the members that are organizing the Science Meets Parliament in Australia, and also the mobilization knowledge that Australia is an example that we are following. And it's a great pleasure here to be here to explain it, because at the end, for us, we are convinced that science and life cannot and should not be separated. And we are doing our best to move it on and to interact and make this interaction as fructiferous as possible, not only for scientists, not only for politicians, but also for the entire society. So thank you very much for your time and for having me.
Thank you so much, Andreu. That was a very fascinating talk. And I've been personally following this quite closely. We have some common colleagues like Edu, and this is something that is actually close to us via RISE, which we'll hear in a minute. So I've got time for one question, two quick ones or one question. Yeah, the back.
Hi, Andreu. Just one question. Congratulations on everything that you have achieved. Is this initiative aiming at the national parliament in Spain only, or also at the regional ones? Because in Spain, the regional parliaments are very powerful in terms of funding for research. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much for the questions, and really good question. And not only for funding for research, the regional parliaments, which in Spain there are 17, as you know, have a lot of decisions in many areas that are influenced by science. As I mentioned, we are focusing on how to help them in managing the health, which is organized by regional parliament, or advocacy, which is also regional parliaments who are managing. We are starting to work with some of the regional parliaments. It's true that for that we need the help of many scientists, and so we are open to started to organize science meets or science in parliament in each one of the parliaments. And we have started in Madrid, in Valencia. Recently, we have an event in Baleares, in Mallorca. And it's something that we are trying to push to ensure that every one of the parliaments is having a conversation with the researchers and is making use of the science. It's a process which is a little bit slow, because at the end it requires a lot of people to work in this process and organizing this kind of events, but we are pushing on them.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andreu. I think that we need to move to the next, but thank you so much for waking up so early and for a very clear and interesting talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this great opportunity, and congratulations for the fantastic meeting.